Welcome back, everyone, to the 2016 Hack Summit. We're joined here by Rod Vag, who is the chair of the Technical Steering Committee for Node.js, and he's also the Chief Node Officer, otherwise known as CNO, for NodeSource, which is an enterprise Node.js company. Rod's made over 1,600 open source project commits in the last year, and he's known for his work across the Node.js ecosystem. And he's very passionate about Node.js and its future. So essentially, Rod, with his role of chair of the Technical Steering Committee, kind of oversees a lot of the governance and the technical decisions that go behind Node.js, and he's a member of that leadership team as well as a core committer. So Rod, it's really a pleasure to have you here today. Thanks for taking the time to make it with us today.
It's a thrill to be here, Ed. Thanks so much for having me here, and it's a great pleasure. So thank you.
Great. So Rod, just to let you guys know, Rod is actually video conferencing in from Australia. Is that right, Rod?
That's correct. Yep.
So this is what's so cool about having a virtual conference, is that we can have speakers that most conferences can't normally get access to, like amazing folks like Rod. And so this truly is an international event. And so Rod,
do we have many audience members from Australia?
We can poll that. We can actually ask the audience where they're from. So I will ask this. And then at the end of
it's morning here in Australia, so I wouldn't be surprised if Australians are just waking up and getting on. So
okay.
Yeah.
So I'll ask this question a little bit later during your talk, and we'll find out the poll answer at the end. And if there's other questions you want to ask the audience, we can poll them on that too. So that might be interesting to engage with the audience here.
Great.
So so just to let the audience get to know you a little bit personally, I'd love to just have you tell the audience in your own words how you got into programming, what motivates you, what are you passionate about as a developer, and kind of how you got into Node and what your role is on an ongoing basis with Node.
Right. There's a bunch of things to unpack there. How I got involved in programming. So I went to university to study electronics engineering, and I got about a year into that before I discovered computers and that I could achieve with computers so much more than I could achieve by messing around with electronics. And don't get me wrong, electronics is great, but the power that as a programmer that you have over your computer, over networks, over vast systems is just immense. And I got completely hooked by computers and switched over and finished my degree as computer science. I went on to do some technical support work at the university while I was studying. I became a network admin, and that took me into the animal science part of the university. So I actually spent a lot of my career in animal science and genetics in particular. And part of that work, I fell in with a group that was doing some interesting work with software, and slowly became a programmer, from a support person to a programmer. And I've spent the majority of my career actually in the genetics field, writing software to apply artificial intelligence techniques to animal breeding. So that's my background, mainly in Java, and later on in my career, I discovered that JavaScript was actually kind of cool and enjoyed it, and found Node, and that was the end of it for me. I find it really difficult to go back to Java these days. Just Node is just an awesome place to be. So my passions at the moment, I'm very interested in open source communities and open source governance, which is the topic I'm talking about today. But as somebody who lives in a small town that is fairly devoid of nerds that are like me, my community is all online. I work for a fully remote company. We're all virtual, and all of my connections with people who have the same interests with me is online. So I have a very strong personal interest in relating to people through online communities, online code communities in particular.
And can you tell us a little bit more before you launch into your presentation about the company you work for, NodeSource, and what their mission is? Right.
Well, we formed NodeSource a couple of years ago, and the goal with NodeSource is to serve the enterprise as as large companies start to adopt Node en masse, like there's this enormous wave of enterprise adoption of Node at the moment. And it's largely an underserved area. So our primary interest is in building up the tools and the services that the enterprise needs in order to be able to lean into Node heavily. So when you compare it with the maturity of the Java ecosystem, for example, Java ecosystem is a great comparison because Java has been around for so long that it's got a really mature ecosystem of tools, particularly for enterprise, and there's best practices. And it's fairly easy to lean into Java because it's a Node quantity. Node is a bit different because it's fairly new. It doesn't have the maturity of tools, so we're building tools specifically for enterprise. We service the enterprise with consulting services and education. So that's our area. And we're fully distributed, mainly located in the US. So we've got mainly US folks, but we're effectively all around the world. And our people travel and work from all sorts of exotic places. So it's a lot of fun. It's a great group of people.
That's great. So NodeSource is essentially the enterprise Node.js company. So if you're using enterprise Node, take a look at NodeSource.
That's right.
Great. So Rod, I'm going to let you launch into your presentation, and I'm going to be on mute. Feel free to call me if you need anything.
Great. Okay. Well, let's get screen sharing going. Okay. Hopefully you can. Hopefully you can see that now. Ed, can you see the my presentation on the screen?
Yep, you look great.
It has subtitle. Whoops. So my presentation is called Node.js and the New Open Source. So I want to talk about Node.js today, but primarily about open source. So who am I? As I said, I'm a former Java developer. I am now a Node.js obsessive. I am primarily focused on the back end these days. I do very little front end. I discovered that front-end engineering frustrates me too much, and I'm much more comfortable on back-end engineering. So I'm here to support the tooling ecosystem that supports the front end, basically. I'm the Chief Node Officer at NodeSource, as I said, and I am a member of the Node.js TSC, that's Technical Steering Committee, and also the Core Technical Committee. And I'll be explaining those a little bit later in the presentation. And I'm an open source governance aficionado. This is something that I spend a lot of my time thinking about and trying to put into practice these days. And it's what I want to talk about today. So what am I going to talk about today? What I'm going to try and focus on is using the recent history of the Node.js project to make some points about open source governance. So I want to use it as an example because it's the example I know best. To talk about where open source governance is going and what the future of open source might look like. So we'll be talking about models of open source governance and a little bit of hypothesizing about the future. Yeah, I'm not a futurist, but I'll do a little bit of hypothesizing there. What this talk isn't, it's not Node.js or JavaScript evangelism. I'm not going to try and convince you that JavaScript is awesome, because in many ways it's not awesome. And actually that's one of the things that attracts me to it. But it's not everyone's piece of cake. It's some people don't like it and try and avoid it. And I'm not going to try and convince you that Node.js is awesome or should completely replace what you do or has a valid place in your company. Let's put those things aside and just use Node as an example to talk about open source. I'm not going to be presenting a simple formula for creating successful open source projects. And I'm not going to be presenting a simple formula for successfully managing any open source project. So I don't have formulas. I don't have checklists for you. This is a discussion that I want to provoke and see what comes out of it. So let's talk about the Node.js journey. So diving into the recent history of Node.js, I think this is a fascinating story, and I hope you agree that there's some interesting things to be learned here. And I think we're pioneering some new models, both in governance, but also in how to build structures around open source. So stepping back a couple of years, 2013, early 2013, Node version 0.10 was released, and it in many ways represented the high watermark for Node. The contributions to the core project peaked, engagement peaked in terms of people collaborating around the core of Node. Release frequency peaked. There were more releases than ever around that period of time, and downloads peaked as well. And there was this very real sense that version 1 was near. We were all on message that that Node was nearly complete, and we could start calling it version 1 anytime soon. There might be a 0.12, but that would just be a small step towards version 1. So it was great, exciting times. Unfortunately, what we got instead was stagnation. We didn't see version 1, and stagnation started to set in. The BDFL model, that's benevolent dictator for life, that is so common in open source, began to be a hindrance to the project. Project stewardship under a single company, limited the avenues for contribution, particularly by large companies wanting to invest in Node. So there were companies around the outside like Microsoft and IBM and even NodeSource wanting to invest in Node, and having a single company really be the steward of Node started to make that really difficult. The lack of communication and transparency around decision making became a problem and increased over time. And the lack of technical progress, particularly regarding V8, which is the JavaScript engine that is at the core of Node and actually makes up the majority of Node. That lack of technical progress was frustrating to a lot of people. So there was this general sense of stagnation and frustration that was building up. And this one for me stood out as well. There was this trend towards openness. Large sectors of the Node.js open source ecosystem were transitioning to a greater openness in the way that they were governed and developed. And by comparison, Node core was frustratingly closed. So it just felt like it stood out, and we were all getting used to these open collaborative ecosystems, mini ecosystems, and Node core was a standout and a frustrating one at that. So we had this interesting journey from Node version 0.10 to Node version 4. And if you have had anything to do with Node in your tool chains in your development life recently, then you'll have probably noticed that Node made a jump from it went from version 0.10, 0.12, and then suddenly version 4. There's an interesting story in here that I'm going to try and outline without going into too much detail. I'll try and resist. This is a timeline that I've shown a few times to describe what went on. At the beginning, we see Node version 0.10 in 2013. Jumping forward to 2014, when this period of frustration and stagnation started to set in, there was this alternative indie effort here that I've put into this blue area as distinct to the orange area here, which is the sort of official original Node stewarded by Joyent, the company that was running the project at that time. So this indie effort started with a group of concerned developers that wanted to move Node forward, and they were in private discussions with Joyent for a long time, and that eventually launched a public effort. So they were just not making progress. So a public effort was launched to move Node forward in various ways. It wasn't an aggressive mood. It was purely about what can we do around the outside of Node core to make it better. Joyent responded by forming an advisory board, which was positive in many ways. They pulled in parties from outside and formed an advisory board, and then through that process as well, IOJS came out of Node forward. So IOJS, which is probably a familiar name, existed for 2015 basically, was a fork of Node. It didn't carry over the Node forward name in any way because there were concerns about trademarks, etc. But it was an explicit fork. Now, to further help this timeline, I've divided it up into some conveniently named sections, and I'm going to call the first section the Age of Discontent. So this was the period where there was frustration setting in, and there was a very strong sense of discontent with how Node was, and that resulted in Node Forward. It resulted in this formation of the advisory board, and it resulted ultimately in IOJS. During the IOJS period, I've called this, the initial period, the Great Leap. And this was when a lot of pent-up energy that people had to apply to Node suddenly had an avenue, and that was IOJS. And people invested in their effort and time in IOJS and really pushed that project forward. And that also increased the momentum in the old Node towards a more open and collaborative system. So there was this effort started to create a foundation around Node, and that's in the top section there. This is the section that represents the convergence of these two efforts. So then in the second half of 2015, I'm calling it the Summer of Convergence, and it's when the Node Foundation was officially formed, and the two efforts, the efforts going on in the official Node repository and the Node releases and the Node website, merged with IOJS, and effectively became the IOJS project inherited the Node name, and the developers that were still working on Node version 0.12 combined together and formed under the Node Foundation and pushed out eventually Node version 4. And Node version 4 came after 3 versions of IOJS. So we had IOJS version 1, 2, and 3. So to keep the numbering consistent, Node version 4 jumped up so as to avoid overlap. And it really was a progression. So it wasn't that it was just about numbering. It took over the IOJS code base. It merged in a lot of changes that went on separately in Node and really converged them together into a new thing. And Node version 4 was the logical name for it. So diving deeper into the discontent and what that resolution looked like, this is a graph that I think helps illustrate what the discontent was about. So during the period from Node version 0.10, which was that high watermark, you can see a steady decline in the number of commits per month to the core project. So commits per month, that's not everything. It's not a perfect measure of the health of a project. It shouldn't be used as such, but it's a useful proxy here to demonstrate what was really going wrong with Node. And this period of stagnation around 2014 in particular, you can see fairly obvious there. And then when IOJS happened, you can see that basically all of the energy that was latent in the project was really spent on IOJS, and a lot of effort went into IOJS. The Node Foundation was formed, and now we've gone on to maintain a much more steady, high rate of commits in the project, and that's increasing over time as well. So that's in terms of commits per month. Releases per month, this is a dubious measure again for the health of a project, but it's a really good proxy measurement, and this one really shows the stagnation that was happening, because we even had a couple of months where there were no releases in a project that had set a pattern for fairly regular releases and updates and fixes and improvements and additions. It basically went down to nothing for at least 2 months here, and only a little bit in between. When IOJS kicked in and formed the new Node as well under the Node Foundation, we went back to a much more consistent high rate of releases. Now we're releasing versions of Node across 4 different release lines. We're maintaining 4 separate release lines at the same time. So these are not all just releases on the cutting edge or on an LTS version. There's actually 3 separate LTS versions in it, and the main development branch as well. I'll explain more about that later. The Node Foundation is worth talking about because this is a really big deal for Node. This is a collection of companies that were there at the beginning of the Node Foundation and invested in the Node Foundation. Each of these companies put money into to create this thing and pay a membership fee over time to keep it existing. And a lot of these companies are companies that are either heavily investing in Node from a services and product point of view, or are using Node. So companies like PayPal, for example, are one of the most prominent users of Node out there in the the corporate world, they're transitioning most of their stack over to Node now, and I believe that it's well over 50% of PayPal's web traffic is served by Node now, and it's only increasing. IBM's service provider there, Joyent, was involved. Is still involved in the project. There hasn't been a cutting off of Joyent. They're still very involved. And you've got other large companies like Red Hat and Intel, even NPM are involved here. And the company I'm involved in, NodeSource, down there as well. We have a very strong interest in this collaboration. So the Node Foundation has a lot of money through membership. I think it's around $2 million come in from membership fees at the moment. That's increasing over time as new members are added. A lot of that money is spent on marketing, PR, dealing with the press, dealing with analysts. There's a surprising amount of money has to be spent on that kind of effort that can be avoided if you if you just stay at that sort of indie community level. But the Node Foundation handles most of that. There's also money spent on legals, managing trademarks, assisting with licensing, etc. The Node Foundation runs some events. Last year they ran a very successful conference called Node.js Interactive. That was in December. And there's a new series of smaller events that are traveling around the US, beginning in the US, but also continuing overseas. The events are intended to be cost neutral over time, but it's obviously it costs a little bit of money to get these things going. There's money for face-to-face facilitation for people who are working on Node. So we've had at least one collaborator summit where we've got people together in the same place to have a week of discussions and moving forward. They've been very productive. And the Node Foundation is now moving into basic education and certification for Node. The Node Foundation doesn't fund technical contributions. They don't pay anyone to work on Node in a technical sense. And they don't pay for any operational requirements as well, which might be a surprise to a lot of people, because this is a common function of foundations, is to pay for operations, hosting, maintaining those kinds of resources. We actually take pride in managing those things at a community level. We have a very sophisticated and large set of infrastructure that is donated largely by companies and also individuals. It's professionally run. It's not some sort of backyard thing where people, donate their time on their desktop computer. It's actually very professional, and we have one of the, if not the most sophisticated CI systems of any open source project that exists today. And we have a system where any of the collaborators can run tests on any of our supported operating systems and architectures and more at any time, including a very large cluster of ARM computers and Raspberry Pis to test all of those popular platforms where Node is used. That's one area that I'm particularly proud of because I've been heavily involved there. The Node Foundation has a sense of fostering the open source ecosystem. So it doesn't own the Node ecosystem, but it exists to help facilitate and foster and serve that ecosystem. And it's a very large ecosystem. You can see this is from modulecounts.com. The green line there is NPM's module count. It shows no sign of letting up, and it's following a classic exponential curve, basically. It's about to double Maven Central in terms of number of packages. It's granted that a lot of these packages are fairly small, but this points to the kind of activity and the diversity of this ecosystem. It's a hugely diverse ecosystem that contains interest groups in all sorts of crazy areas. It's just amazing. So the Node Foundation has a concern for fostering this ecosystem, making sure it remains healthy. And it also is interested in, obviously, because it's formed by companies, it's interested in fostering a commercial ecosystem. And I saw some questions in the QA, and I'm happy to talk more about this, but I'm very passionate about this. I'm not some sort of open source fundamentalist that says that commercial activity doesn't belong in open source. I actually think that commercial activity has an important place to play in open source because it provides the kind of infrastructure and tooling needed to adopt these technologies at the kind of scale that most impact our lives. So as we see huge transitions to Node at PayPal, Netflix, Walmart, you name it, there's companies all over the place that are adopting Node and are replacing large parts of their stack with it and using it heavily in production. There needs to be a commercial ecosystem there. So my company that I'm involved in, NodeSource, we develop a tool called NSolid, which is it's a production deployment platform. It's a production management platform for Node, where it's specifically targeted enterprise. But you have lots of players in this ecosystem, and the Node Foundation is very concerned about making sure this is healthy and works well for all the players and can grow that space. This is another area I'm quite proud of that we've achieved since forming the Node Foundation. This is a graphical representation of our release plan, basically, focused on our LTS plan. So what this shows here, the yellow line, the orange line in the middle there is our master branch. Pretty much everything happens on our master branch. All active development happens there. That's where the focus of activity is. You can check out the Node repository and look at the master branch to see where Node is at any point in time. Off that master branch, we pull off these stable branches and we create these stable release lines. So at the moment, we have Node version 4, which has moved on from stable. You can see the timeline there was October. And Node version 5, which is currently still in its stable period. Node version 5 will eventually disappear and stop being supported. It's not intended for long-term support. Every second major release is intended for long-term support. So after 6 months of during this stable activity period where features are added and things are aggressively pulled from the master branch to make releases, 6 months after that, every second of these turns into an LTS branch. And so you can see Node version 4 is one of them. Version 6 will be one of them as well. Version 6 starts its process in April and will turn into LTS in October. And they continue on for 2.5 years of support so that people that need it, particularly enterprise and companies that are relying on Node and don't want to have to worry about what version they're on and having to upgrade and keep on, they can put that part out of mind and know that that they have this period of time where it's going to be supported, updated, patched, security is going to be addressed for this long period of time. And also, it's for people that don't want to care about the underlying technology, just the active development. If you're a developer that's only interested in building cool technology, you don't have to worry about what new features have been added to your platform. These LTS branches are actually great for that. On top of that, we have Node version 0.10 is still being maintained, and 0.12 as well. These are both effectively in LTS mode now, where we're maintaining them until the end of the year. So we've guaranteed stability for people that are using it. 0.10 is still very popular out there. We can't support it beyond October because the version of OpenSSL we're using ends its LTS life then, and so we have to put it out of its life and in October this year. So this is a very stable, well understood internally release plan. It can be hard to communicate, but it does provide assurances for people that need stability, but it also provides avenues for faster progress. And on top of this, we will have a canary style process coming out of it as well to allow for more frequent updates. Another measure of success is can be measured in engagement, and I find this thrilling. This is the number of unique committers to the repository per month. So if you take a month slice and you see how many unique individuals were involved in the commits for that month and graph it, this is what you'll find. And we've pushed well beyond the highs of the 0.10 days, and we're maintaining new highs now and breaking new records. And so this is January this year. Actually, December, I think that is, had the highest, nearly 80 separate individuals involved in the changes in Node Core per month. So this is a really important metric that we care about in Node. So onto the meat of what I really want to talk about, which is open governance. I'm going to be circling around this a little bit for the next little while to try and tease out exactly how this works, but Node Core is managed by a group of 54 collaborators. And from that is pulled a group of 13 CTC members. So CTC is Core Technical Committee. So this is a subgroup within that collaborator group, and they serve as like a peak body within that group. 9 of the collaborators are authorized to publish releases, and they publish. They have different focuses, like NodeSource and IBM, for example. Our contributions to releases are often usually focused in the LTS releases, because our customers care about these things, so we focus a lot of resources there. Other of the release individuals are focused more on the cutting edge stable releases. Effectively, contributors, people who contribute, control and own the project. This is a really important point that I'm going to try and drive at here. I'll explain how this works in a minute, but that's a really important concept. We have no single point of failure. We're improving in that area. Our bus factor is getting better. You can take out any one individual from the project and it will keep on going pretty healthily. You can take out 2 or 3 and will survive. It might be a bump in the road, but we're minimizing our points of failure through this process. We're also ensuring a diversity of perspectives, backgrounds, and expertise. We have a really diverse group of people that are contributing to Core, diverse perspectives and diverse understanding about what Node is, what it should be. And they're all contributing into this thing. This is our group of 54 at the moment. Last time I presented on this, I had a slide. This was only a couple of months ago, and it was a 5x9 slide, and now it's a 6x9. So it's growing all the time. All of these people are involved in this collaborative group. Some of them are more active than others. Some of them are inactive, but it's this constantly changing list over time. So to talk about it more in terms of structure, the way it works is we actually have this group above the CTC called the TSC. That's Technical Steering Committee. They manage the high-level project. They focus on administrative concerns, and they relate to the foundation board. They're much more a technical administrative body. The CTC, Core Technical Committee, they manages Node Core. They're primarily a technical group. The collaborators manage the day-to-day project. They work on a consensus-seeking basis in Node Core. They defer to the CTC only on difficult questions. So most of the activity happens within this collaborators group, the vast majority of it. Working groups also split out from these collaborator groups and also pull in other individuals that are not necessarily collaborators. And they're interest groups and advisory bodies, and they manage sub-projects of Node Core. We've got working groups for LTS, for build. They manage the infrastructure, API concerns, including the C++ add-on API, HTTP benchmarking streams. We've got a working group for looking at inclusivity and diversity. Documentation working group is fairly new, but it's got an amazing amount of activity. It's improving documentation. Website working group that's primarily responsible for Node.js.org and some other website properties. And we've got the internationalization and language group working groups as well. They either relate to the TSC or the CTC, depending on scope. I'll explain that in a minute. This is a graphical representation of how the foundation is structured and how we operate. Hopefully you can read some of the details here, but at a high level, we've got 3 groups. We've got the foundation board that are made up of member companies. So they pull from member companies to create this board, and they represent these member companies. We have the executive, which is where a lot of the foundation's money is spent. That the executive contains a full-time community manager who is responsible for pulling together a lot of the different activities of the foundation and maintaining some businessy things. We're in the process of hiring an education coordinator. It's a part-time position, may end up being full-time. They do marketing, they do events, and a bunch of other things in the executive. And a lot of the assistance for that actually comes from the Linux Foundation. The Linux Foundation has a lot of resources, and we get to pay for portions of that resource. So we don't have to hire a graphic designer full-time, for example. We get to pay one of the designers in the Linux Foundation just for what we need. So we've got this nice relationship with the Linux Foundation that works quite well for us at the moment. Then off to the side, where it's the largest section because I think it's the most important, and it's where I mainly exist, which is the technical execution and community side of the foundation. It's run by the TSC that relates both to the board and the executive, and that's the technical administration side of the project. Within that, we have the Node core project, which is mostly what I talk about when I'm talking about Node. And within that, it's run by this group of collaborators who are themselves run by this CTC group. Not run by in the sense of told what to do, but it's a group that can help facilitate what they do. So that's the Node core project. We also have some other top level projects. Both of these ones that I've listed here are in incubation status. So we've got libuv, which is an important component of Node core, but it's also a separate project. It's a C library that is used by Node and a bunch of other things. And Express, the Express web server that many people will be familiar with if you've ever written a web server in Node. That's recently been adopted as an incubation project in Node core in order to make it to solve some issues with regard to contribution and governance. So these are under progress, and they will each have their own governance structures as well around them that are similar in openness to the core. We have these working groups that operate underneath the projects, and we also have working groups that operate directly underneath the TSC. So this is what the foundation looks like. So moving on to open governance, this is using all that information. I want to use that to talk about what open source open governance means, because Node is a great example of this, I think, for a large project. So let's skip some of this through this quickly so we have time for QA. But open source history can be defined by its tools. If you look through the past 20 to 40 years of open source and look at the tools that we have used to do open source, you can largely separate the eras of open source by its tooling. For example, SCM tools. If you divide up the history of open source by these large categories, CVS, and perhaps its precursor, RCS, if you want to go that far back, was sort of taken over by Subversion. People started moving to SVN, and it represented a new way of doing open source. But then it was also subverted by distributed tools like Git and Friends, and Git really has the ascendancy now, where the vast majority of open source projects are managed by Git now. But these are very distinct eras in open source, and it's the same with source code hosting and sharing. You can divide the history up into these similar categories, where we had the old Wild West open source, self-hosted, where you threw things up on a website and you maybe hosted a CVS server, or you did this basically Wild West approach, followed by SourceForge, which was actually quite revolutionary and really was a very important part of open source history. It's kind of lost, and it's pretty much dead these days. Very much taken over by GitHub, which is now the preferred tool for hosting and collaboration these days. So it's again, like GitHub has the vast majority of open source projects hosted on it, with more projects moving to it every day. So the progression is interesting here. Why have we evolved in our tools, and why do we adopt these new things? Well, I think it's because we are seeking a decreased collaboration friction. We want to make it easier to collaborate with each other. Our tooling, we need it to be easier so that we can collaborate. There's a greater focus on community in that process, and there's a greater focus on openness and transparency in that process as well. And each of these tools represents a step in that process. As an interesting side discussion that I'm not going to get into, it's interesting to ponder what might be next, because there's no reason to think that GitHub or Git are the end of the line for these tools. There's no reason to think that GitHub has the ascendancy forever, or that it will maintain its status as the preferred site, or that Git won't be subverted by some new tool that does things better in some way. I don't know what these things look like, or whether they're decades down the track, or only a few years down the track. But we shouldn't get into the pattern of thinking that we're done. GitHub and Git, that's awesome. We're finished. We found our perfect tools. because our needs and desires change over time as we experience more what it means to be in community around source. So this is my hypothesis. With a trend towards reduced friction, increased community, and greater openness, I think the future of open source looks more like a wiki than it does a traditional walled garden or a traditional individuals, an extension of an individual's preferences on code. It looks more like a collaboration around code and code as an emergent property of that collaboration. One concrete example of this working in the wild is called open source. And this is the one I'm most familiar with, so I'm going to use this as an example. But it's not the only one. There's plenty of other people pursuing these models in different ways. Open source states that individuals making a significant and valuable contribution is given commit access to the project to contribute as they see fit. A project is more like an open wiki than a standard guarded open source project. So its goals are to make open source more like a wiki, more like a collaboration around code than a protected garden. The basic guidelines of open source. Don't mess with Git history. And this is mainly about tooling. Our tooling doesn't support some of these models very well, so we have to put some guidelines in place to make it work. So don't mess with the master branch. Don't rewrite the history. Don't force push the master branch. That's sacred. Everything else beyond that is up for grabs. Internal pull requests to solicit feedback are strongly preferred. And again, this is about tooling. This is the adapting our existing tools to make this work. Changes are about a discussion, and they're about opening up avenues for collaborating further. And consensus seeking is preferred for everything. No one has the right to push forward things, to railroad others. New contributors get equal ownership and a seat at the decision-making table explicitly. New contributors, if you make significant contributions and are accepted as a new contributor, there's no hierarchy. You get to be at the same seat as even as the person that started the project. And if it came down to voting, you even have the right to outvote that individual. So there's no BDFL, benevolent dictator for life. Respect and moral authority are earned, not granted. So you have to earn these things. What is the impact of this? Well, projects are actually driven by the people and groups that value them the most. I know of no better way than to solicit feedback from a user base of an open source project than by measuring who puts their time into a project. You can do polls, you can do surveys, whatever, but the people for whom a project is most important are the most likely to invest their resources in that project. Which means if you're going to step up and do a pull request, make some changes, and submit yourself to that process of arguing for a change, that suggests that you have a strong enough interest in that project existing, thriving, and being a certain way. So the projects are most driven by the people that value them the most. This is interesting as well. A project's vision or roadmap only exists as the intersecting interests and desires of those most willing and able to invest in the project at any point in time. So talk of a project's vision or its future roadmap. They're not nullified, but you have to approach it in a different way, because you can't just write down what a project is and what it is trying to be, because what that is actually a reflection of the people that are in that project and are passionate about it at that point in time, which can change over time. But on the flip side of that, it doesn't suggest that things are just constantly in flux, because the need to work towards consensus actually forces restraint, particularly as you get larger groups and more diverse groups that are arguing from different perspectives and want different things out of a project. Compromise and stability sort of emerge out of that process. This is one of the most beautiful things I think of this process. And openness begets openness. If you are brought onto a project in a spirit of openness, you're very much more likely to interact with others in that same spirit. And I see this all the time in these open projects where people who are embraced will embrace others. And this makes for a much more healthy community and a thrilling place to live, honestly. How does this relate to Node.js? I'll try and skip through this because I know I'm running a little bit short on time. Node.js uses a variant of open source because this model was pioneered in the Node ecosystem, and many of its strongest proponents have driven the open governance push in Node, with some variations though, because Node is quite a large and complex project. So it uses a two-tier governance model, as I said, to help make difficult decisions, because making difficult decisions can be very tricky with this very loose collection of people. So the CTC serves as a backstop for that decision-making process. Collaborators do everything else. The CTC has a 1/4 company membership rule, so no individual company can have more than 1/4 of the members of the CTC at any point in time, and this is to stop any one company from swamping the project, from taking it over with its own interests. So that's just explicitly set up to enforce that. The CTC meets regularly to talk about concerns that have been elevated to it, and it often pushes decisions back onto collaborators. So decisions in the CTC will often be simply, we're not going to make a decision, we're going to push it back to GitHub and let that decision be made there because that's the appropriate place for it to be. The CTC is self-selecting. It seeks diversity in perspective, skill, and background. It tries to be as representative as possible of the collaborator group, which in turn tries to be representative of the user group. And the CTC recognizes technical and organizational merit. So people on the CTC are there not just because they are technically capable, but also because they may have skills in other areas. So we've got people on the CTC that are there purely because they have been vital in helping organize the project, to helping triage issues, things like that. So it's not just about technical merit. The collaborators are also effectively self-selecting. They nominate new members based on contribution. We haven't automated this process yet. We haven't found great tooling. We haven't built great tooling here yet. So it's largely a matter of allowing the collaborators to highlight individuals that they've been working with on new contributions, and they're onboarded on a regular basis. They operate primarily via pull request on GitHub. So it's all about discussion. There's a minimum sign-off requirement. You have to get at least one other collaborator to sign off on your change you're making. But there's provision to make maximum input. So you can't just propose a change, get a sign-off, and merge it, in a few minutes. You have to actually leave pull requests open for a minimum amount of time to allow for feedback. I think currently it's 48 hours during the week and 72 hours over a weekend. So that allows anyone that's interested in that particular part of the project to get themselves involved, either add to the sign-off, ask questions, or object. So in that process, you have to recognize objections and concerns, and you have to work in a consensus-seeking process. The majority of changes actually get through fairly easily. So often they're little documentation fixes or code tweaks. But as soon as somebody drops into a conversation and says, well, hang on, I've got a concern here, or this doesn't look right, you have to drop into a consensus-seeking mode where you have to work towards allaying concerns, compromising, or even withdrawing the proposed change. In the collaborator group organically forms themselves into interest and expertise groups. And this is based on so what people are most passionate about and what they are best at. And they earn respect and deference from other collaborators for different aspects of the project. So, for instance, crypto is a great example because there's very few of us that even have a clue about crypto. And so we tend to defer to those individuals that are expert in that area, and we have a number of them. And changes proposed by those individuals in that area, much more likely to get in because there's a smaller group discussing and able to critique those things. But also any change that impacts on those areas will pull in those people to get some sign-off. So you have other groups like the C++ layer, people who know more about V8, Windows experts, people who are interested in debugging. The build group is interested in how things are built. People who are passionate about testing. We've got people who are passionate about testing. That's amazing. Documentation is another one that's got a large group. And we've even got grammar experts that are known for being really good with structured English, and we'll defer to them. So this means that Node is self-sustaining. We have a better bus factor with Node now than most open source projects. I strongly believe that's the case, because we don't have 1, 2, 3 individuals that are really vital for the project. We have a collective. Relationships and people structures are dynamic, and they adjust over time, and we see this constantly in flux. People move on when their passions or interests fade. They might just be sick of the process and want to move on, and that's fine. We should make allowance for that in our open source communities. New people join as they see ways to make an impact, or as they develop new passions or ideas and they want to bring them to the project. So it's constantly changing. And so what Node is actually doing is using natural community structures and the evolution of those community structures. It's harnessing those for the long-term health of the project, rather than trying to create those structures and use those structures, and enforce those structures. It's actually harnessing the existing structures that we naturally fall into for the long-term health of the project. It does have guide rails, because it's a complex project and it has very complex requirements. The collaborators answer to the CTC, who answer to the TSC, who answer to the foundation board, and the board answers to the member companies, and even their member companies answer to their customers and their shareholders, and there's multiple layers of responsibility here and accountability. These are not used. There's no big carrots or sticks going on here, but it exists. And just lastly, I want to just quickly touch on leadership, because I don't want you to get the impression that I think that leadership is not important, and I'm dismissing BDFL, and therefore I'm dismissing the importance of leadership. The importance of leadership in an open source project is directly proportional to the size and complexity of that project. And I've seen this from small projects all the way up to complex projects like Node, where strong and quality leadership matters more in those more complex projects. In the simpler projects, it's not as important, and you can actually get away with a much more fluid and dynamic group that doesn't really have strong leadership characteristics within it. So leadership is important. Quality leadership is rare, but it's easily recognized. It's not something that you can just manufacture out of nowhere. It does raise up either through natural talent or training or both. And that's, it's thin on the ground, but it is easily recognized when it's there. So quality leadership tends to get raised up. BDFL model exposes a project directly to the absolute best and the absolute worst of a leader. When you have a project that is directly connected to an individual, even two individuals, the project will advance according to the skill and leadership of those individuals, but it will also suffer when they're at their worst. And that, people are not perfect, and exposing a project directly to people's imperfections risks that project. The collaborative process rewards, encourages, and capitalizes on great leadership. And a collaborative process can guard against not so great leadership. So, myself, I'm not perfect. I have a leadership position within the Node community. I don't want Node to suffer when I say the wrong thing publicly and upset people, or I don't want Node to suffer from my foibles. So this process is great for that, and I see it in exercise all the time. Lastly, to sum that up, earned leadership is greater in all respects than imposed leadership. This is the heart of this collaborative process, where the people who earn respect and deference, that is a much better way to run a project than by imposing it from the top down and pretending that an individual is given that just by natural process. Anyway, I'm going to end up there because I've used up most of my time, but thank you very much for listening. I'm Rod Vag. You can hit me up on Twitter. You can email me if you want, or chat with me now, I believe. So
great. Thank you, Rod. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, so thank you for that talk. We actually have only a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we got a few audience questions answered real quick before you take off. And are you available to chat in a Hangout with
am.
audience members? Okay, great. So we'll do that afterwards. So first of all, let's go to the polls and see what our audience said to the questions that I asked during your talk. So about 2/3 of our audience has actually tried Node.js. About 6.5% have actually been to Australia. That's pretty cool. And the audience was split between loving Node.js and not being sure or having not tried Node.js. But
That's fair.
very few people said they hate Node.js. So they either
No,
love
that's
it, or
surprising.
they haven't tried it, or they're not sure, basically.
Node has a lot of haters. Maybe they just haven't showed up for this talk.
Yeah, maybe there's adverse selection for our audience, right, due to the subject. And then how are you using Node? So about 1/3 of them are not using it. About 40% are doing it for personal side projects. And then there's actually about 11-12% who are split between doing it at a startup and also doing it at the enterprise level. So we've got some early signs of enterprise adoption of Node in our audience itself.
That's pretty typical, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So let's go to the questions. So we only have time for maybe 1 or 2 of them. So maybe, probably we'll have to do brief answers to these, Rod. So the number 1 question with 201 votes is, what will be the future of Node as we have seen a lot of people moving towards Go? And what is the reason? And actually, I kind of have seen this pattern as well. I've seen a lot of Go adoption among some of the hardcore developer community. So where do you think Node and Go each fit into the ecosystem, and what's your prediction in the future for each of the languages?
Look, this is a tricky one because I don't want to pretend that that Node is the best choice in all situations, or that Go is. I also don't want to dismiss people that choose Go because they think it is technically superior, because perhaps it is for those people, and perhaps it is objectively. That's hard to answer, but yeah. So the future of Node is strong. All of our metrics are pointing upwards for Node. That the project is healthy, adoption is healthy, enterprise adoption is absolutely insane at this point. It's huge. And Go has a place in the software development ecosystem. It's a great systems language. It's very approachable when you compare it to other alternatives at the systems level, but it doesn't span the breadth that Node does in terms of where it's applicable. So Node finds its home primarily in that we call it the front end, back end. So that the web server behind the front end, and that first tier, but it also can go all the way down the stack. And we've seen some really surprising low-level applications of Node that I probably don't want to go into at this point for reasons of time. But these things have their place.
Makes sense. Great. And then the last question we can take. Let's see. So maybe we'll try to take this one first. There's two similar questions actually back to back that are almost the same. So basically, this whole take on Node.js development for the enterprise. What are some of the challenges there? Maybe you could address that real quick.
Challenges for the enterprise. Tooling is the biggest challenge, and that's why I've said this a couple of times today already, that NodeSource exists in this space because NodeSource is actually a collection of individuals that are passionate about Node, that want to see it healthy and thrive and survive, and that see enterprise adoption as the key to that long-term health. So we want to ensure that the enterprise has success with Node, which will give us more Node in the future and better Node. So it's actually almost a selfish thing where we want better Node, we want more Node, we want greater Node adoption, and the enterprise is the way to do that. So the biggest challenges are around tooling. Having the same kind of maturity that Java has at the moment is a challenge for Node, and we're working towards that, and there's a number of other companies that are working towards that as well. That's the biggest challenge, I think, by far. We've managed to solve many of the other challenges like stability and assurance for long-term support. Those things are now have got really solid answers, but there's got to be a maturity in tooling that enterprise needs.
Great, thanks, Rod. Okay, so we're going to have to, just for time reasons, take the rest of the questions offline into Rod's video chat session. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast now. Rod, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate your insights about Node, and fascinating about how the internal governance model works at Node. I know it's so intricate and so advanced. I mean, this is a serious project, and you guys really have. Yeah, I mean, it opened up my eyes in a lot of ways. So thank you. So please join Rod in a one-on-one session to get your Node questions answered. Please consider donating to a nonprofit by clicking the button on the screen. And check out the Hack Guides project also if you want to help us spread knowledge like this throughout the world. Thank you, Rod.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks to everyone else at Hack Summit.